Bitcoin's not for everybody, it's for anybody. I do think, though, the community has to come to terms with certain things. Ordinals is the thing that really bothers me most. Everybody directly associated with Ocean does not like the spam, but at this point, we're still less than 1% of the world hash rate. Ocean is a fight against it, but we also believe in freedom and choice. Why is it if I'm attached to different FPPS pools, I'm seemingly getting different revenue streams? It bothered me. President Trump said that he was going to name a Bitcoin advisory panel. I don't know who's going to be on this panel, but I have some guesses.
Bob, welcome back to the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Great to see you.
Good to see you too, Bob. And we're just back. Me and Luke are just back from a mining conference in Maribor, Slovenia, that was put on by a mining company called NicehashX. Are you aware of them?
Yes. We have a little bit of hash rate directed at NiceHash. I've worked with them for many years. Yeah, good guys there.
Okay, good to hear.
Even though, as I'm sure we'll talk about, I am involved in with the Ocean pool, but the world needs lots of pools. The world needs many different people approaching this from many different perspectives, and I'm glad the NiceHash people are there.
Yeah, so are we. We could do a shout out here, Luke, and to Nina and the team for treating us so well and putting on a very nice conference. We had a great time in Maribor. Anyway, what have you been up to since last we spoke?
Well, I would say there's three things. The first one is the creation of Ocean. Second one would be I've done a whole bunch of work in developing products in the block space area. Done a lot of thinking about kind of the future of block space, where it's going, the geopolitical implications of block space, a lot of those sort of things. And then of course I have my actual business, which is creating mining companies. We've been very active developing new mining sites too.
All right. And is the spam issue over in your mind, or is there still a problem there?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say the issue is not over, although I would broaden it in two perspectives. The first one is that I think the debate about how block space is used will continue on for quite a while. In other words, what even is spam? I mean, there's clearly been divisions about, is a JPEG on here spam, or what's the proper use of op-if and op-false and like some of those sort of things. But there's still a lot out there, a lot of people thinking about and promoting non-monetary uses of block space. And I don't think that's going to go away for quite a while, until it's probably priced out. And there's always a risk, though, that some of these alternative use cases really clutter up block space. They create false economic conditions within the block space, and they deter people from using Bitcoin as, at least I believe, it should be used.
I completely agree with that particular case. And I've done some back of the napkin math on this, is that over the course of a human lifetime, roughly 70 years, if we take that as a starting point, there'll be maybe room for 15 billion transactions in that time. And therefore, if we divide that by roughly 8 billion people, probably more than that, everyone gets less than 2 transactions ever. Right.
Yeah.
And that's just not enough. And the deterrence thing is something that I think is not talked about nearly as much as I would like, maybe, because that's sort of brushed off to the side sometimes, right? That oh no, this isn't hurting adoption. No one cares about the price of Bitcoin. But why do you think that this is a deterrent?
Well, first, I support your math. So this is the way I look at it. There are 53,000 blocks per year, give or take about 500. There's nothing we're going to really do to change that number. There are 4 million weight units. For those less technical, it translates to roughly 4,000 transactions maximum per block. So that gives us 200 million transactions annually. So I'll look at it a little differently than you looked at it in the span of a human lifetime. I'll look at it in terms of the global population. There's 8 billion people. There's 200 million base layer. Actually, I don't even like the word transaction, honestly. This may be a little, I view it, I call it resolution, because there are a lot of non-economic purposes of the base layer. And now I'm not talking about spam. What I'm talking about is, hey, I'm doing a UTXO consolidation, for instance. That's, to me, that's not really a transaction. That's why I use the word resolution sometimes, because a coin join or something like that, I don't really view those so much as a transaction. But anyway, if you look at that 8 billion people, another way to look at it is, if I wanted to send every person in the world 10,000 sats, let's say, and I didn't do it with a multi-output. So I'm oversimplifying a little bit. It would take 40 years of 100% of all of the block space to get every person a little bit of Bitcoin, right, on the base layer. Or another way to look at it is, there are 330 million corporations in the world. And if we are expecting someday for all companies to have at least some treasury, or to have some part of their economic flow in Bitcoin, well, that's a problem too, right? That there's not even, we couldn't support every company doing one transaction a year even. So the base layer is just so precious, and interacting at the base layer, I think, should be considered a luxury.
Absolutely. Like my view on this is that Bitcoin, first of all, Bitcoin is not for everybody; it's for anybody. So, and if you compare it to real estate, like most people, if they ever own a house in their lives, they make 2 of those transactions, maybe, or maybe between 5 and 10 in extreme cases, where they buy and sell property, because property has taken over what should really be a use case for money, which is the store of value, or as we prefer, medium of exchange over time. So the monetization of everything is like making real estate become money in this sense. And this, I think this is where Bitcoin's like superpowers come in, and this is where Bitcoin's best functionality it is and should be as a medium of exchange over time. And like removing real estate and equities and stuff like that, and government bonds as media of exchange over time, when that function could be covered by Bitcoin. So what are your thoughts on that?
I completely support it. I like your phrase a lot, that Bitcoin's not for everybody, it's for anybody. I think that's a wonderful way to encapsulate that situation. I do think, though, the community has to come to terms with certain things that, what I'll say is probably very controversial, but it's in line with what you just said, which is, everybody can hold their own keys, but not everybody will hold their own keys. And mathematically, that's impossible because of the math we just went through. And I think we have to be careful about perpetuating certain schools of thought within the community that deter people. In other words, if we fast forward X amount of time, we'll call that some number of years, right? If I'm talking about kind of not the short term, but the long term, then if we've also said, not your keys, not your coin, we've just removed a whole bunch of people from participating in the ecosystem. So I think we have to be careful about that. I think one thing that the community generally gets wrong is, it goes down to the word subsidy, interestingly, that the subsidy which again, for those less technical, but the block reward, which is basically the miner's revenue stream, at least in today's terms, I'll get to that in a second. Miner revenue today is really looked at as subsidy plus fees, and the subsidy is, I think, thought of really exclusively as a reward for the miners. But I think that's a half truth, that the subsidy is also there for the users. And it was there for us through this initial period that I believe we're at the end of, that says, hey, you get free and unlimited access to the base layer. And it was part of this, like I said, I call it the introductory period of Bitcoin. It's kind of like we're coming up to the end of the year, and every gym around the world, usually in January, has some sort of a special, like, come to the gym for free in January, and get in good, healthy habits, right? Get used to coming to the gym every day. But in February, you're going to start paying. And I think that's where we are with Bitcoin. Is January is about over, and we're about to go into February. And so users of the base layer are going to have to start paying for access to the world's most secure, most free digital network in the world. And so that's, I think, going to be a rude awakening. I think we almost see the bubblings of, block size wars type discussions, right? Kind of brewing right now. You could kind of feel that these sort of things, like the whole thing about expanding access to block space and facilitating payments and all that, I can really feel that momentum starting again.
Yeah, and here's something I'd love to pick your specific brain on, because I think this is an area of Bitcoin which is the most misunderstood, because I've seen it many times described as, the users pay the miners fees, and then the miners find the new Bitcoin, so they find the subsidy. But that's not how it works. It's the users that pay the subsidy as well. Like the miners find the blocks, and the users allow the miners to find extra Bitcoins in the block. So that's all permissioned, like, by the users. The miners couldn't have found those new Bitcoins if the users hadn't allowed them to. And they allowed them to because that's how the consensus rules are set up. That's how the issuing schedule is set up. But the miner is not digging for Bitcoins. The miner is digging for blocks. And this is so misinterpreted. And that's why all these debates are so skewed, because they think that miners need more incentive. No, miners don't need any more incentive. Like, users don't care how the miners make money. They care if they secure the network or not, like if they provide the service or not, and find blocks. That is the function of a miner, and a miner is completely paid by the network to do that service for the network. Yes, and first of all, I'd like to pick your brain on that, and then I'd like to follow up with this thesis that we heard in Maribor, because it's so fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think another way to look at it is, so I agree with what you've said, but I'll offer a different way of looking at it. I think that from actually the miner side, though. So I think miners, every company produces something, right? And the kind of the nature of being in business. So you have to produce something. And I think the appropriate way to look at a miner is that a miner produces block space. So I'm restating what you've said from the opposite side. And I think, unfortunately, though, the vast majority of the mining community, the people that are mining, have not looked at it that way. That I don't want to single out specific competitors is the wrong word, but other miners, right? I don't really compete with other companies, but I think the number of people that are actually active in the mining community that understand what they're doing and their function within the ecosystem is quite small. I think there's a lot of folks that look at it from the no, we produce Bitcoin perspective, and they take this digital energy, we're converting in, energy to create this digital asset. I don't look at it that way. I look at it from the block space perspective. And we'll get into a few. I don't want to disrupt your chain of thought, but we'll come back to what does it mean when you start thinking as a miner in terms of producing block space.
No, go ahead.
Continue. You're on a track here. Continue.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, so I think if you look at producing block space, then you realize that block space is the commodity. Okay, so if you think of block space as a commodity, and then if you put on, let's say, the hat like a farmer would think. Okay, so a farmer looks not just at what he's producing today, but he has to kind of plan, right? So if I'm a wheat farmer in Nebraska in the US and I'm growing wheat and I plant the crop in April or May, I'm going to have a harvest in October. Okay, and I understand kind of over time what I'm going to produce, but I also look at it and say, hey, I'm expending a certain amount of energy. It's costing me a certain amount to produce this wheat, and I know that in October there's a certain result that's going to occur. But if I wait to sell all my wheat until October, I've taken on an inordinate amount of risk, right? That market conditions in October may be up or down. So if I can start monetizing that earlier, that makes sense for me. So if I planted in April or May, and I may immediately go into the marketplace and say, hey, wheat is selling for $4 a bushel. That's a fair price. So let me offer contracts worth 20% of my expected harvest today for delivery in October. Okay, so and there's a whole marketplace, right, that comes out of that, because now you have speculators and, but you also have a real consumer on the other side, right? That's the key thing. So you have somebody on the other side, which is a baker, a large commercial baker, who's saying, hey, I'm going to bake a lot of bread in October, so let me go buy this contract that allows me to lock in the price of wheat and control my costs. So we have a natural need for the producer to start moderating his revenue, and the consumer to do it, and speculators in the middle. Block space, I think, is exactly the same way. So I think what we're going to find is that block space in certain windows, especially, is going to become inordinately valuable and expensive. So as an example, we're sitting here in November 12th, the day of this recording. The last week of December, my guess will be there will be huge demand for block space. So let's say I have 1% of the world's hash rate. I know that in the last week of December, I'm going to produce about 10 blocks. So I could go out today and pre-sell at a price that I feel comfortable with one of those blocks to a consumer of block space. Swan Bitcoin maybe knows, hey, we're gonna do a lot of sales in the last week of December. We're gonna have a lot of people that want to move to cold storage. So we need to have access to that space then, so they could go buy that block ahead of time. So if you think about it, it mimics the exact same thing as the wheat guy, right? I'm producing it. I know I have a certain forward production. And as my revenue stream, as measured in Bitcoin, becomes more fee-based and less subsidy-based, it also becomes more variable. So this allows me to lock in something ahead of time that I feel comfortable with.
So miners are producers of block space, but there is only that there's only this sort of this specific number of block space that can be produced because of the rules of the network. And the miners are paid by the users with fees and subsidies and allowance to find new coins in the form of a subsidy. But that subsidy is rapidly diminishing because of the halvings, and the fee market will take over. So here we go into Kenobi's thesis territory, which we talked with a strapping young lad called General Kenobi in Maribor about. And that is that right now, most mining companies are fiat-minded companies. So what they do is they immediately sell the Bitcoin and they pay their electrical bills with whatever revenue with the revenue from selling the Bitcoin. But going into the future, that will be harder and harder because while the fees will take over, still that might not be enough. That's dependent on demand for block space going up. So miners who value the SAT more than the thesis is basically this. I'm all over the place here, I know, but
okay, I'm still following you.
So miners who value the SAT higher than its current dollar price will have an advantage in the long term, which means that miners who also use their mining rigs for other purposes than just finding block space, that is heating a greenhouse, for instance, or doing other things that you can do. You can use the excess heat from the miner, for instance, for other stuff. There are probably other byproducts than heat that you could use for other things as well. Don't know, I can't think of what that would be just now, but all
There's
of this.
a lot of them.
Yeah, like a suspension mechanism for energy companies, as we've talked about many times, with like how they could stabilize grids and so on and so forth. And Bitcoin mining could be a part of a larger operation where it acts as a buyer of last resort of stranded energy. That's one of the things. So his thesis is basically that over time, the more fiat-minded miners will go out of business, and the more Bitcoin-minded miners will not. So the lower time preference you have as a miner, the more well-off you are in the long run. And sort of explains itself. Low time preference, you win in the long run. It's aligned with all the other theories around Bitcoin and why it's so useful as a medium of exchange over time. So this is what I'd like to pick your brain about. Is there a truth to that? More Bitcoin-minded miners can and will win this game in the long run, game theoretically. What do you think? It's a bit of a complicated question, I know, but
yeah, it's a good one. So I'm gonna both agree and disagree. So first, on the agreement side, I think there is a niche. I don't think it is the end solution. I think there is a niche where we will continue to see that. I'm actually involved in one already. We have an operation in northern Florida with a greenhouse up there, a commercial greenhouse. And we have a mining operation set up along the perimeter of the greenhouse that allows us to vent in. So he's in northern Florida, so he's just far enough north growing tropical flowers that he sometimes has humidity issues or heat issues. And so the miners sit on the perimeter of the greenhouse and vent in whenever he needs it. So we're doing that already. And I think there are other applications, whether that's residential heating, commercial heating, drying food products, for instance. There's a lot of different ways. And those, I think, will emerge and they will be significant, but I don't think it's the majority of the story. But this is another way of saying what I will agree with Kenobi on is I think the concept of a mining company actually, I believe, goes away. That I don't know if this was his end conclusion or the inclusion, but a mining company that just mines goes away. But there is a second type of miner that emerges in the future. And by the way, I don't necessarily like this one, so I am not proposing it, but this is, I think, the end game. I think we're going to have those type of miners, cogeneration type stuff, we call that, right? The other parts are going to be parts of very large financial organizations and nation states. So if we look, I'll give you an example. So if you look at an organization like Citigroup, I believe that they will eventually have a mining function within Citigroup. And the reason they will do that is Citigroup will go to their customer base, who is becoming increasingly more Bitcoin dependent, and say, hey, as part of doing your banking with Citigroup, we will give you guaranteed base layer access at a fixed sats per VByte number. And they won't even care whether they could care less about the subsidy or the fees. What they care about is the relationship with their big customers. And I think an American Express, even at the individual level, could do the same thing. They'll say, if you have an American Express Black card, part of your feature is you get 5 base layer interactions a year on us for free. I would also say if I were, so I don't like this, but I'm just telling you what this is the way I think it plays out. That and the other thing I would say is if I were, let me think of if I was, where were you, Slovenia or Slovakia? I forgot. I always forget where NicehashX is.
Slovenia.
Slovenia. Okay. So if I was the head of state of Slovenia right now, what I might do is say, hey, we are going to put an initiative together to have 1/4% of the world's hash rate in our country. And we'll control a little of that with machines owned and run by the government, but we'll put incentives in place also to attract other miners to our country with tax incentives, grants, those types of things. However, in order to qualify for those incentives, they must use the Slovenia pool, meaning the Slovenian government would control the template creation. So I think what I'm ultimately saying, it goes back to our earlier point, is that it's control of block space, whether you're a big financial institution or a nation state, that really is going to drive things. And the control of the block space won't be because they want the block reward. That will be a consolation prize. What they want is they want control of the network.
This reminds me of an old Andreas Antonopoulos thing. And that is that if miners, and his thesis is on miner centralization in general, but I guess this would apply to this too. Wouldn't we as users just throw those fuckers off the network? Like if there's ever a Slovenia pool, wouldn't we like, no, we don't want statism in Bitcoin and just reject blocks found by that pool? Sure, they can do it in more covert ways, but don't you think the game theory plays out so that we sort this so that we don't get this in Bitcoin?
I think it's hard to throw them out. If only the Slovenia pool pops up, then we can do that. But what if 80 or 100 nation states all do the same thing? What if, Citigroup and American Express and Deutsche Bank and Mitsui and all these other financial institutions all pop up and they're all controlling a small percentage of the hash rate? And then the other side is like right now where we sit with the pools, like who's going to kick them off? Because, we are so far, I don't think Foundry is going to kick anybody off right now. I don't think Luxor is going to kick anybody off. Ampool's not going to kick anybody off. So we have to have a pretty radical, even to have a hope of what you've said, we have to have a pretty dramatic change in the way that the blocks are created and who's creating the blocks.
Hey there, Luke. What are you doing for Christmas this year?
Well, Knut, since I worship Odin, I'm celebrating winter solstice instead.
Oh, that sounds totally stupid. How about celebrating Christmas instead?
Oh, okay, I can do that.
Great, because I have some ideas for Christmas gifts for you. Just go to the Bitcoin Infinity store and you find almost anything. Well, if anything is like 20 products, but you'll find the perfect gift is our new book, Bitcoin the Inverse of Clown World, because it's absolutely great, isn't it?
I think it's absolutely great, yes. And you can use code Infinity on a bunch of other places on the internet as well, including Bitbox, Stampseed, Shop and Bit. Just try it everywhere.
So go click on do the things, and like, subscribe, and brush your teeth.
Merry Christmas.
Happy solstice.
This episode is brought to you by Bitbox, our favorite hardware wallet. It's easy to use without compromising security, and it's the perfect gift for your pre-coiner friends just getting interested in Bitcoin.
Yes, a Bitbox is the perfect Christmas gift. You can just put a Bitbox in a box and leave it for a bit, and then give someone a box with a Bitbox a bit later during Christmas.
Exactly. Right now, they have a great deal for Christmas with the Bitbox Christmas Special. Get the Bitbox 02 hardware wallet, a copy of the little Bitcoin book, plus extra cards and tags to personalize your gift.
So go to bitbox.swiss/infinity and get your Bitbox today in a box.
Make sure it's the Bitcoin only edition.
Yeah. Otherwise, a very cute rabbit dies somewhere. Probably. Yeah, but here, Ocean is the counterexample. Like the Ocean is the network reacting to skewed incentive structures in mining. The Ocean is the one. Right now, I think it's the only one, but there are more pools that are more like Ocean and less like Antpool coming online, and like this is a force, and the hash rate is going up for like this is a resilient system, and we've shown the mining cartel that we can fight them before during the block size wars, which is like the example of why Bitcoin is not run by miners, and we can do so again, like or can't we?
Well, first of all, so part of the reason I want to be clear too, I am not saying I like this. I want to be really clear. That I'm not saying I like it. I am here to fight it. And we'll chat more about that maybe in a bit. But I'm on the board of directors at Ocean. I was the first company in the world to direct hash rate to Ocean. I won the first block for Ocean. First company in the world to use the Datum server with Ocean. So I'm all in, right? So that said, this is why we fight. And I have this adage or philosophy that, I think of Bitcoin as money for the next 1,000 years. And so I'm not thinking about Bitcoin from the perspective of next Tuesday or next year. I'm thinking about decades and centuries with what I'm saying. And so we're going to fight, whether we're going to continually fight these kinds of initiatives, because anything this powerful, anything this valuable is going to be constantly subject to centralization forces. There's just the way it is, right? Somebody's going to always want to control it and capture it, just the way it is. Ocean is a fight against it. We have found some momentum, especially recently. It's been a slog, to get it. But at this point, we're still less than 1% of the world hash rates directed at Ocean. And we do need a really big number directed at Ocean. And also others, as you've said. We started the show with me being complimentary of NicehashX. Well, I applaud them and support them for being out there and being independent, right? That the Chinese oligopoly of pools is a major issue, right? They have over 50% of the hash rate right now, for all intents and purposes, with a single leader, with a single entity able to direct what happens within those pools, and that's scary to me. But I also think we have to look at, we're going to fight as nation states. We've seen it now, this huge momentum in the United States, right? Well, I just saw before I came on with you guys that President Trump said that he was going to name a Bitcoin advisory panel. So he was going to, create. I don't know who's going to be on this panel, but I have some guesses. And my guess is that the people on the panel will not be looking at Bitcoin the same way the three of us look at Bitcoin.
No, there may or may not be some semi-unfortunate names on that list, but there may also be intelligent people on the list.
I hope so. I'm hopeful, but I said that I think that at the nation state level, I don't know if to even talk at that level. Bitcoin does it's kind of a weird thing though too, because like I would say to the people of Slovenia, this is actually maybe potentially very positive for them though too, that the sovereignty of their country could be improved by having access to Bitcoin. Like they can't be canceled by the Western powers or China, that they at a nation state level can have some way of interacting with the rest of the world that they can ensure. So it's a very complex issue.
Yeah. Speaking of Trump, like if his advisors are the thing his advisors should tell him is what his other advisors are telling him on free speech, for instance, like, and on whatever, censoring the media and all of this, corrupt academia, all of that. Like, he seems to be heading in the direction of take the government out of the equation. And if we could do that for this industry too, that's obviously the right way to go. And I hope his advisors tell him to keep his hands off of Bitcoin mining and and of Bitcoin in general. Like, just keep your hands off, and even of crypto. Like, let people scam one another. I just keep the government away from everything. That's it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, but the last thing we want is a subsidy or a tax incentive to the mining industry.
No, we just stay the fuck out.
But I think that's counterintuitive to a lot of people. I think we're all of the same mindset, and we've thought through these sort of things, but that's horrible. But I'm hopeful because he's saying things like, "Hey, I'm going to kill all the electric car subsidies." So I'm hopeful that.
Exactly, and he's also said that he's going to drop he's hinted at that he's going to drop any capital gains tax on Bitcoin, because money, you should be able to use money. He's used terms like that. So no capital gains tax, no other tax, no subsidies, no VAT, no government, basically, and you're fine. And at least it's better than Kamala.
Yes, absolutely.
So maybe returning a little bit to the ocean stuff that we segued into here. Can you go a little more into the origin stories of ocean? Because our last conversation apparently was just before ocean really came up. It's a big story. Tell us everything.
Well, in June of 2023 is when really the impetus to restart started gelling. Mainly the Dasher starting to perceive what was going on. And I will say, in parallel, as I mentioned, I come from the perspective of I'm a miner, I produce block space, right? And I was very frustrated. I want to produce my own templates. We had already seen by June of 2023 some of these things happening, and I was frustrated that I was being, I'm big enough to not be small, but I'm not big enough to be big, right? As a miner, that's kind of where our company sits. So I don't have
your own blocks, but yeah, you need pools.
I need a pool, right? I can't find enough blocks to say I do have fiat needs. I do have to sell Bitcoin to cover certain costs within my organization. So I have to have the cash flow. So I was very frustrated, but I felt like there was that realization that I've had really for a couple of years that I'm just a mercenary. I'm a mercenary hasher is what I am, right? And I didn't like the people I was performing the mercenary services for the most part. Didn't believe in the cause, and was very frustrated. So that was where my mindset was. So then in June, Luke Dasher had the idea of restarting. He was able to get the ear of Jack Dorsey. Jack was very supportive and put up the initial financial inflow to kind of get the thing restarted. About 6 weeks later, I was at a conference with Mechanic. I actually gave a speech on block space and the future of block space at that particular conference, and said some of the same things we were just talking about earlier about how scarce it is and the future of block space. So Mechanic came up to me. I actually didn't know him until that point, but he came up to me right after my talk and said, "Can we chat?" I said, "Sure." So I ended up going to dinner with him and Mark Artemko, who's the president of Ocean. We had a 4-hour dinner. Realized we were completely philosophically aligned about completely revamping the way pools worked, fight the centralization factors. So I committed on the spot a certain percentage of my hash rate to their initiative. I then, knowing that this was so important, I have a small Bitcoin fund that I run. So I whipped up some money. I think I'm the second largest, through my fund, I think I'm the second largest investor in Ocean after Jack. So we put a pretty good chunk of money into Ocean. Then in November, we held the launch event for Ocean at one of my facilities. And I have a facility in South Carolina, which is a hydroelectric facility. So we bought and rehabilitated a hydroelectric facility about 3.5 years ago. And we do what we call wild mining there, meaning that what we did is we literally cut the cord. So it's a hydroelectric facility. It's relatively small. It peaks out about 1 megawatt. But I cut the cord back to the grid. Said, I do not want to even be connected to the grid, because that is a mechanism by which I could be forced to move my energy back to the grid, right? I want to make sure that I am completely permissionless, or as close to permissionless, in this operation as possible. And so we held the launch event there. It was really a great launch event. And then ironically, we were very small at the time. I think we had like 300 petahash in the pool. And within the first 24 hours of launch, found a block. And it was one of my systems. And that was just a thrill. Like in terms of, there's different moments of your life. Okay, you get married, you have your kids, you have those sort of things. But professionally, that was just one of the coolest things, was to find the first Ocean block. And one of the things you guys may not know and John probably may not know, is that when you're part of a pool like Foundry or Ant Pool, you get paid every day. You don't know whether your machine won a block or not. Like you don't know if you contributed. At Ocean, we not only know that it was Barefoot's hash power that did it, but I can identify the exact machine that did it. And so as we won block,
a little bit of extra love or something.
Oh yeah. Those are highly prized. Yeah. So we have stickers that go on all the machines. So over time, we have a sticker that goes onto that particular machine that records, the block height, and it gets some extra PLC. At the launch of Ocean, I think things we talked about spam before. The world got a little sideways after we had won a few blocks, because they started to see that the templates that we were using weren't following the quote unquote normal process, which is the normal process is for if you're a pool, this is the algorithm of today. The algorithm of today is, does the pool have any transactions it needs for itself. It puts those in the template first, right? So by template, what we're talking about is if there are 200,000 transactions kind of waiting for confirmation, and you can only pick 3,000 or 4,000, what criteria will you use to select those, right? So when we talk template, that's basically what we're saying. And so most pools work this way. Are any of those transactions mine? Yes, I'll put those in. And then I pick those that, quote unquote, provide the highest financial reward and fill up with those. And by the way, every few seconds that gets updated. So as new transactions are presented to the network for confirmation, you may kick them out, right? Until you win the block. So Ocean didn't follow that same process. What it basically does is says, and it does, but its mempool is different. We'll be technical about it. Its mempool is different because its mempool doesn't recognize certain transactions. So if, for instance, the op return is got too many characters in it, it ignores that transaction. So it follows the same process, but its mempool is actually different.
Yeah, there's no such thing as the mempool.
Yeah. Every node has its own mempool, and it can decide what it wants to reside locally. So we took quite a bit of flack for that. However, and this was, I think, one of the great misnomers, is that as much as I think pretty much uniformly everybody directly associated with Ocean does not like the spam. I'm, for instance, very anti-ordinals. The ordinals is the thing that really bothers me the most. But we also believe in freedom and choice. And so we always had this in the plan. But then we offered, after a few weeks, 4 different templates. So it was the first time, and one of those templates was for, I guess, best categorized as, anything goes template, right? So there's if you wished to participate in Ocean, you could choose one of the 4. But the key thing was, as a miner, you're starting to become a miner again. You're not a mercenary, right? You now get to pick and voice your opinion about what you think was appropriate. But that wasn't really the end game. And the end game was, I shouldn't even say the end game because we're still innovating. We still have other things to do. But the big milestone point was what we now call Datum, which was allowing individual miners to create their own template, but still have the attributes of a pool. And that was launched on September 29th. I believe I have the date right. Again, I was very proud as part of Barefoot to be the first company to get a Datum server up and running. We unfortunately didn't win the first Datum block, but although, what's the interesting thing about Datum, for those who are a little more technical, is that we have the option of putting in whether or not our name or how can I say this? Like, you can identify yourself as the winner or not. And so we had this, we're going to I'll just tell you, we'll vacillate. We'll occasionally announce ourselves as the winner of a block, but we primarily won't. And the reason is that I'm very open with just about everything that goes on, but I don't like announcing how much hash power I have. So if I announce every block I win, I essentially am telling the world how much hash power I have. And that's, to me, that's the equivalent of, Bitcoiners don't ask other Bitcoiners how much Bitcoin they have. And I think you shouldn't ask miners how much hash power they have.
This episode is brought to you by Stampseed, the perfect metal backup solution to securely store your recovery words. Their titanium seed plates are stress tested and are resistant to fire, corrosion, crushing, and other unexpected events. Even in the case of a disaster, your recovery words will still be visible.
Yeah, so don't buy any of those stupid other seeds that you can plant in the ground and grow trees with. get a stamp seed instead. And when you order it, they will put it in a box and put a stamp on the box and send it over to you. So it's great. Go to stampseed.com right now.
Exactly. We partnered with them to make the Everything Divided by 21 Million titanium seed plate and use code Infinity at checkout for 15% off your order.
Yeah, don't stamp other seeds. Stamp seed words.
This episode is brought to you by the Bitcoin Advisor, the best team in the industry to help you safeguard your Bitcoin with collaborative self-custody.
And where is Bitcoin Advisor located, Luke?
Everywhere.
Yeah, but they're based somewhere, aren't they?
Well, we're all based somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah, and we're based. We're super based. And so are the Bitcoin Advisor.
But I think you're getting at that they are originally from Australia.
Yeah, I might have been getting at that. Yes, you're right. So they might be able to help you, advise you about kangaroo taming. This is a stupid ad, Luke.
So visit thebitcoinadvisor.com and book a consultation with the best Bitcoin advisors in the business.
Yes, bingo.
This whole story is fascinating, and I mean, yeah, like having just this first step of anyone being able to now be a decentralized miner, a self-sovereign miner. We sort of sometimes say. I mean, and I mean, I'm not sure you're aware of this, but we've had Mechanic on a couple of times. We talk about Ocean a lot. We're big fans. We're completely aligned on the not being fans of spam side of it. You got into a couple of things that I think are related to this, and this is sort of the payout method of Ocean. This is one of the parts that appears innovative in the space. And I think we touched on this a little bit last time. FPPS versus other payment methods, but Ocean basically just it pays out what it receives in a block to the people who contributed hash power prior in that block. And I mean, that seems smart. But FPPS is the typical payout method at the moment. Again, with Kenobi, we did a pod in Slovenia with him, and then I was on a panel with him. One of the things he said was that FPPS is dying. That basically the existence of Ocean, and he's working with Demand Pool now. They're going to be a Stratum V2 pool next year. Also good, I think.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. And so FPPS is dying or FPPS is going to die. That basically the Oceans of the world and those that pay out on a model that isn't FPPS are going to outcompete eventually. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like I know you basically ran this kind of test did you actually get better results on FPPS pools or Ocean? Can you get into that?
Yeah. So what I started doing, it's interesting. It goes back to before Ocean. So I started suspecting that my results from different pools were inconsistent. Like I was wondering why. This goes back like 2 years. Why is it that if I'm attached to different FPPS pools, I'm seemingly getting different revenue streams? It bothered me. So I said, well, I'm an engineer, right? So I said, okay, well, I need to really understand what's going on. So what I did is I took a container, the exact same container, exactly the same mining rig, exactly every other thing. Like, so they're in the same container, they're connected to the internet the same way, through the same firewall, all that sort of stuff, right? So I took 10 units, connected them to 4 different pools. And I just said, what really matters is how much I get paid. So I started running the study, just kept the same machines running and recording every single day what the payout was, and sort of building this case history. And then when Ocean came along, I added them to the test. Well, first, before even Ocean came, I started seeing radical differences. And by radical, at that time, it was maybe like 3 to 5% variance over even extended periods in FPPS pools. Well, something is amiss. There really shouldn't be that sort of variance. Then I connected Ocean into the same control group, and I now have a year of history. Okay, so because, well, give or take a few weeks, right? I now have a year. I actually just provided it, the data again to Mechanic earlier this week. So we will publish it through Ocean. But what you're going to see is that if you look at the 1 year, the 30-day, the 60-day, and the 90-day, all those 4 different looks at it, Ocean has dramatically outperformed the other 3 pools in the control study. I don't name the other 3 pools because I'm not here to bash them, but what we're here to promote Ocean and let the world know that FPPS is flawed. And it's I used that term mercenary hasher before, and there have been times that I've been attacked personally, and even I've had people go to some of my investors, I have investors within my group, and say, hey, Bob is not performing his fiduciary responsibility to you. He's working with Ocean and they're not picking the fattest blocks. And said, well, I'd have hard proof for you that I am performing my fiduciary responsibility and that you're the one not performing your fiduciary responsibility because you're using the other pools that are not producing the highest amount of revenue for your investors. So, and just to be clear on this, like it is a dramatic difference. Like the 1 year study is going to be on the order of 15% difference.
Whoa, that's way higher than I thought. Whoa.
Yeah.
Well, and from our understanding of this, was basically this 15 comes from that the pools advertise a certain spread, but they don't include certain other things that they include in their FPPS calculations. Like, for example, not taking the highest variance blocks, like the lowest 10% and the highest 10%, and just doing other things that lets them keep a larger share of the pie. And if 15% is what we're talking about, I mean, yeah, that's massive. And I mean, how long is this going to be able to go on where pools just aren't transparent and the expected value to miners is so much lower than Ocean's at this point?
Not to mention all the briefcases full of dollars that they get on the side for putting shit in the blocks.
Yes, well, that's a great point, Knut. Well, I think that briefcase on the side is where the 15% went, right? That a whole bunch of it. But I don't want to repeat things that are covered in other shows. But when you look at the FPPS calculation, the general formula is look back in the last 144 blocks, which is on 10-minute blocks, 1 day of blocks. Throw out the 3 lowest and the 3 highest, and then average the remaining, which would be, what would that be? The remaining 136 would be what would the average was. But the problem, I think, in the last year that we faced is that there's not much variance on the low end, but there's a lot of variance on the high end. So they're not throwing out equals, right? So they're that's one issue. Another issue that I can only be suspicious of is that with Ocean, I know at all points in times what percentage of that pool's hash rate I am and what percentage of the shares I have earned. I know that in real time at all times. When I'm connected to another pool, I have no idea what percentage of the hash rate I am or what percentage of the shares I have earned. It's 100% trusted model, which I find fascinating. It tells me that most miners are not real Bitcoiners, by the way, because they don't trust verify is completely thrown out the window in that model, like in the FPPS model. And that is their Bitcoin, right? So it like for us with Ocean, I know all those things. Plus I get paid directly from the Coinbase all the time too. So my Bitcoin has never been routed through somebody else. It's not filtered. It's not like, so I don't want to go too deep on this, probably not a topic you guys want to dive deep on, but I am continually amazed that FPPS has lasted this long. And I can only say that it just points to me how far away from the ethos a lot of the mining community really is.
Yes. Fuck around and find out is the flip side of don't trust, verify, basically.
Yeah.
And they're about to find out when they see that, there's 15% missing money from what they're doing. So from one thing to another here, almost. This is still tangent. And I don't know if you know this, but we couldn't get I couldn't really get what I was looking for from Kenobi. So do you know the differences, the crucial differences between Datum and Stratum V2?
Okay. So Stratum V2 is a much bigger project. Okay. So it's somewhat of a boil the ocean protocol. I'm not against it by any means. It just didn't fit what Ocean was trying to do. And it includes things like encrypted communication and things like that I think are very valuable and still may, even for Ocean at some point, become something that has some value. What they're trying to do, though, is work with essentially these centralized pools and their methodology to create the block template creation. And it gets extremely complicated in how that interaction occurs. Datum is very, very simple. Datum is set up to really only do one thing, and that's to sit on the side and interface between the pool, telling it what the appropriate share information is. So, in other words, here are the members of the pool and how much their current share data is. And it ensures that those creating templates abide by that share data. That's really all it's trying to accomplish. So that makes it much, much easier to administrate and much more transparent. And by the way, it's also set up so that it's open to the world. It's an open source project, and other pools could use it if they wanted. It doesn't have to be just Ocean, or you could solo mine with it as well. It's just that the moment a Datum server doesn't use the appropriate share information from Ocean says, well, you're not part of my network, right? So I'm gonna ignore you.
All right. Yeah, that explains it. That was more of what I was looking for.
Yeah, good, Bob. We've gone a few places here, and I think even since going back to the start, what you mentioned, basically we've talked a fair bit about Ocean. The block space commodity thing is still interesting to me, and I'm not sure I actually picked up on your what you were getting at with this, with sort of a paying for futures. What do you see as the practical effect for users of the Bitcoin network if people are going to be if miners and other users are going to be thinking of things that way? Yeah, practically, what do you mean?
So that probably is worthy of clarifying some, Luke. Okay, so today, here's what we know about the Bitcoin marketplace, right? We can, if one of us wants to initiate a transaction to the other, we can go out and there are tools, whether that's at mempool or through your wallet, that will estimate what the appropriate SAT per VByte could be and help you pick your urgency, right? But it's all real time, right? So if you know that you have a transaction or a group of transactions that you want to initiate next month, you have no idea what you're going to face, right? Anything could happen. Given that, when I'm creating, and it should be specific too, I am specifically creating this as a product. Okay. So the idea is this: as a miner, if you control a certain percentage of the hash rate, you can make predictions about your block production or block space production in a certain window of time. And in a world where subsidy disappears and fees dictate your revenue stream, there can be a desire to want to pre-sell access into that ahead of time, right? Okay. To lock in and know that that you're going to have a minimum threshold. So what will happen is we have built, I'm working with a company called Block Spaces out of Tampa. We are developing a platform which will be a marketplace for block space. But it's not just a derivative marketplace like speculating on hash rate going up or down or hedging. It's a fulfilled commodity marketplace. Meaning, I'll use that example I gave before. These are the mechanics. Barefoot Mining offers access to a block in the last week of December. Okay. And we throw it out there we offer a contract at 15 sats per V-byte. Just use that number. Okay. 15 sats per V-byte, 4 million weight units are offered into a marketplace. I, by the way, collateralize that with a certain amount of Bitcoin, meaning I must fulfill that contract. If I do not, I lose my Bitcoin. On the other side are consumers of block space. Somebody says, I would like 1 million weight units in the last week of December and 15 sats per V-byte to guarantee that I'm in a block in the last week of December is a fair price for me. So they buy that contract and they transfer that money into an escrow account. So my collateral is sitting in escrow, and by the way, all this is done in smart contracts sitting on Lightning. So we built all this in a smart contract platform sitting on Lightning. So both the consumer and the buyer have these locked in. Now, when we get to midnight on December 24th, they must present to me whatever transactions they want. Okay. And that gives me 7 days to fulfill that contract. If I do, I get the collateralized Bitcoin back, and I get the fees that they provided to me. If I don't, I lose all the collateral to them. Now, in the middle, people can speculate. So you could trade, you could be a trader. But what I'm excited about for the user, which was, I think, really even the average user, even the people that don't want to use this marketplace, is you will now be able to see over time a projection of where fees will be. Because you'll even if you're just a guy wanting to do one transaction, you'll be able to see where things are more expensive and less expensive. And so you can plan ahead of time. Let's say you're trying to do UTXO consolidation. You're trying to see a period of time in which the future price of block space is going to be lower. You will now have access to that.
Okay, I have a practical question here. Again, I'm kind of about the practicalities of this. This is interesting. It's like the futures market for Bitcoin block space as a commodity. Very great way to put it. I think there's definitely things to dig into there. But my first question on this is, what about if some entity is presenting transactions, of course they can decide whatever they want, I suppose. But I sort of have what if they don't have a big block of transactions? I guess they would be going to find transactions to buy something like this. And on the flip side, like, what about for individual users who would typically just broadcast a transaction and it goes in the mempool? Does this sort of bypass all that? I know it's a sort of a two-pronged question, but it's all related. How does this thing work in practice is really the question.
Well, when I create my own templates, So I think this is if I missed your question, we can hit it back. So I am still the block template creator, and as we talked about, I have my mempool, right? So these transactions. So when it comes time to fulfill, but like I said, I've sold a contract for one block, and at midnight on the 24th. Okay, so I'm going to have until midnight on the 31st to fulfill that contract. So on that day, I must the users must notify me of their particular transactions. So here, transaction ID X, Y, and Z are mine, and they need to be prioritized by Barefoot. So I will see that in my mempool, and I will know what I have to do to fulfill that contract. And I'm going to obviously prioritize them above everything else, because I got a couple Bitcoin on the line if I don't do it right. Is that your question? Or
sort of? Okay, let's maybe play through this. Like if they're doing this entirely out of band, if they are just putting their transactions in the mempool, like what if some other miner is the one that actually mines their transactions? Do you care about that? It's as long as
they aren't going to broadcast them to the world. They'll broadcast them to me. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And then I guess another point to this then is that would someone need to this is sort of a mechanism bypassing the broadcast everywhere for transactions generally, right? Like this wouldn't really apply to someone who's just broadcasting any transaction, or they could decide to go to this marketplace and do it like
it's open. Yeah, it's open to the whole world. It just, today, I mean, it'll all be transparent. The world will see how many contracts are offered in what for which period of time, and what the sats per VByte are. So, like, in my mind, it gives the world a glimpse beyond the present, into the future. And I think that, at least for me, I think that's important, that, we get a glimpse of what is demand out there, in the future. Because as people start planning their lives and planning their businesses more around Bitcoin, I think you need to see around the corner. You need to see a little bit more into the future than we can today.
Yeah, and maybe I'm a little hung up on that. It's not likely that these contracts are always going to be one block at a time, right? Like it's.
Oh, no. And that's why I said it's a weight units. So I might offer one block 4 million weight units, but you can buy it in 1,000 weight unit increments. You could just buy part of that block. And if I don't sell the whole block, it's okay. Like I could let's say I offer a 4 million weight units, but people only buy 500,000. That's okay. I will fulfill the 500,000, and I'll just go into the general marketplace and pull the rest.
Okay, my questions are pretty satisfied here. I'm interested to see what this looks like in practice, but yeah, like creating a futures marketplace, and I mean, this is entirely permissionless based on these decentralization mechanisms anyway, and mining pools may already be doing essentially a similar thing, right? But this allows.
Well, but there's no transparency, right? I think this was like Knut was saying, like, people carrying away a bag of cash. Well, everybody's going to know exactly what we're doing, and if we're part of the pool, which we probably will be when we fulfill these, there'll be a mechanism by which we, share the appropriate amount with the other members of the pool. So we're not gonna, now if we solo mine one, then okay, we can do that. But if we're part of the pool, then we will have to share appropriately with the other pool members.
Okay, it sounds fascinating. I mean, the concept of block space scarcity in general, I think is going to be a bigger and bigger topic, like you're saying. And so, interesting to see how this is going to play out in the future. Well, I think we've tackled a couple of really big topics today, and so I think from my side, was there anything else you wanted to discuss today that we haven't covered yet?
Well, I'll just let you know, my main business, we're continuing to go hard. We've got a couple really interesting projects. And I can't remember if we covered it last time, but basically my philosophy is I believe in what I call horse class mining. And I believe it's the most important part of the infrastructure, which is small to medium sized commercial mines. A megawatt here, half a megawatt there, or 2 megawatts there. My goal is to build as many of those as I can. I'm not trying to be small. I just don't want any big ones. And I don't really desire a single 100 megawatt facility. I think that's it's probably not the best thing for me, and I don't think it's the best thing for Bitcoin. But we're starting to get a lot more diverse in what we're doing within those. So I mentioned earlier, we have a hydroelectric facility in South Carolina that we run. We're bringing up one in Indiana right now, which is based on anaerobic digestion, which is using the cow shit, basically, from a dairy farm. So we're doing anaerobic digestion there. That'll be a couple of megawatt facility. We just bought some natural gas wells in Pennsylvania. Where, again, we will. These are all what I call wild mining too, which is permissionless. We don't need anybody's approval. Nobody else has to produce the energy and decide to send it to us. We do it all ourselves, and I think these are really important parts of the infrastructure. I hope there are others, and I hope there continue to be others trying to pursue the same thing. Just like you mentioned with the Kenobi thing, I think the stuff with cogeneration is also really, really important. And the combination of those two is actually the ideal one, right? Where you produce the energy and then you use the heat, and now you have something like really, really cool. And people have had these visions for quite a while, but they are becoming reality. And by the way, the economics are phenomenal. So I will tell you that chasing energy on grid at scale is not a winning game. I think that the whole thing about, Bitcoin providing base load and curtailment and like all that other stuff, there's a truth to it. I'm not saying it's not true, it's not valuable, but I think it gets oversold. Bitcoin can't solve all the world's grid problems. It can't use, like, the economics just don't work right to consume to balance the grid and perform curtailment all around the world. I don't think that ever happens. I think there will be pockets like there are in Texas where it works and it's effective. But the future of Bitcoin mining and the economics of Bitcoin mining are going to be much better when you produce your own energy. Like my cost of producing energy in my off-grid operations is way, way less than my on-grid. And I think that as a mining industry, the big guys are going to find it's harder and harder to participate. I think most of them will actually end up pivoting away from Bitcoin, and they'll go to HPC and AI stuff. Because if you think of all the world's energy, like it's on the grid, I think a good way to think about it is like there's a bell curve, right? So there's about 27,000 terawatt hours of electricity produced annually. And for the most part, it sits on kind of a bell curve, with about 14 cents per kilowatt being the midpoint of that bell curve. And so we've already gone out. So the Bitcoin miners on the 4 standard deviations away from that midpoint, we've already gone and found most of the on-grid stuff that sits like way out on the fringe. And there's just not that much more that sits out there. And unlike 3 or 4 years ago, where we were the only ones trying to fight at that that far to the right of the median point of the bell curve, we're now competing with the AI guys who have more money and are willing to pay. They have more capital to spend, and they also can exist at a higher operating cost. So anyway, I think the future of Bitcoin is off grid. Future of Bitcoin mining is off grid, both because it's the energy that will be available, and it is the energy that is actually the cheapest. And so that will change dramatically who exists in mining and who survives.
This is great, and I mean it echoes exactly what we were talking about this past week here with that basically miners will no longer necessarily be only Bitcoin miners. It'll be attached to other things. I just love that we're hearing this thing over and over. The trends in Bitcoin mining appear to be that there's some consensus that actually this is the future. This method is the future, that these are the sources and the places where mining will happen. Even that decentralization is going to actually work here because the incentives are towards that, with what you were talking about with the FPPS coming out so low. So I mean, great to hear. And I mean, exciting to see this happening. And obviously, I don't know, actually. Hopefully Barefoot survived the post-halving crash in hash price terms, and now we're looking like clear skies. So hopefully good times ahead, right?
Yeah, actually, I know we're kind of running long, but it's interesting. Obviously, we survived. Hopefully, we can continue to survive. But one of the problems in the industry is that most of the mining, well, I shouldn't say most of the mining, the public miners haven't been economically incented to improve their operations and run profitably. And I view this as an infection of the fiat system into the mining community. And it's not good, right? So hash rate right now is unnaturally high. That's the simple way to put it. The economics say that we shouldn't have this much hash rate. Now, a lot of people look at it as a good thing, right? Oh, the network's more secure, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there is an element of truth to it. But what's happened is the public mining companies especially have had easy access to capital, very cheap capital. And they haven't largely deployed it responsibly. They've continued to grow hash rate even when it wasn't profitable for them. And that puts pressure on companies like mine, who do operate much more efficiently, but it prevents our growth. It makes it harder for us to grow. It's essentially taking profit out of our pocket and moving that money there. And so I would say to all those out there listening, if you are an investor in a public mining stock, I would say ask yourself if that company is really aligned with your ethos. I'm not telling you what to do, but is it aligned with your ethos? Is it making Bitcoin better? Is making Bitcoin better really your priority or not? You make those choices individually, but I would say that the public mining industry has created a lot of stress and strain on the small and medium-sized miner who must operate profitably. We don't have a capital market that we can go draw on. We either are cash flow positive and profitable, or we die. That's it. And we talked a lot about incentives, right? Well, our incentives are properly aligned. I think most of us that are like me are real Bitcoiners. We are very ethos-centric. I said this before. I tell my team all the time, we make decisions that are best for Bitcoin, not the decisions that are best for Barefoot, because we believe by making the best decision for Bitcoin, that ultimately it is the best decision for Barefoot. And so I would just say, hey, if you're investing in some of these public mining companies, decide what your philosophical approach is, and then ask yourself whether or not those companies are aligned with you or not, or are you just chasing a fiat gain? Up to you.
I absolutely love that, because that's a flaw of the fiat monetary system makes Bitcoin mining worse. But Bitcoin mining produces Bitcoin, and therefore, users produce Bitcoin, but Bitcoin mining produces block space, which in turn turns the fiat into Bitcoin, which is then fixing the problem.
Yes.
So while the fiat-minded shitcoiners of the world are out there trying to put shitcoins on the blockchain, people like Bob and real Bitcoin ethos-minded people are turning actual shit into block space and fixing the problem. I just love it. It's absolutely great. So thank you again, Bob, for coming on to the show again. Always love having a conversation with you. We'd love to keep this going, and have at least a conversation a year with you to see where you're going with all the things, because this is absolutely brilliant, and I think more people should hear about it and how mining works, what the issues are, and how Bitcoin fixes this, because Bitcoin fixes everything, as we just might take a little time.
Oh, well, thank you, gentlemen. I love you guys. You guys keep fighting the good fight too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and go check out Barefoot Mining. Go check out ocean.xyz. Where can we find Barefoot? Where can people find more about Bob and Barefoot?
Yeah, barefootmining.com, Twitter, boomer_BTC. And I have a little show that I do called Old Man Yells. You can find it on YouTube and Spotify and all that. Just me on rants. So if you didn't get enough here, you can get some more there. So.
Oh, okay. So go check that out. And Luke, would you like to wrap this up, please?
Yep. Thanks again, Bob. Just echoing everything Knut said. Loved having you on. So thanks again. And you keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great things for Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin in general. Thanks for having you here. Looking forward to seeing you again in person. Hopefully it's not too far in the future.
Awesome.
Thanks again. And this has been the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Thank you for listening.